Hello and welcome to The Print. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor, and I'm joined by Amogh Rohmetra, who's a senior correspondent. And today we're going to be in conversation with Mr. Praveen Chakravarthy, who is the chairman of the Data Analytics wing of the Congress and also of its professional wing. But key to our conversation today, he's also a member of the panel that came up with the Congress Party's manifesto. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So thank you so much, Mr. Chakravarthy, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, Amogh, why don't you get the ball rolling?
Sure. So let me start with something that has been an important poll plank for the Congress over the last couple of years, the old pension scheme. Why is it not there in the manifesto this time? Do we assume that Congress has done away with its demand of old pension scheme?
Okay, so it's interesting that you want to start by what is not in the manifesto. Okay. Um, I think there's been a lot of ink that has been spilled on the whole old pension scheme versus new pension scheme. I don't think it's any secret now what my personal views are. That apart, it is a fact that the government of India has acknowledged that this is an issue. They've set up a committee under, I believe, the Finance Secretary, Mr. TV Somanathan, Dr. TV Somanathan. And the committee is tasked with looking at the pros and cons of old pension scheme, new pension scheme, what should be done, should they adopt the Andhra model or not, and those types of things. So at this stage, we felt that it was premature to go ahead and promise anything in the manifesto when the committee is already set up.
So it is not something that has been done away with. The demand has not been done away with by the Congress Party.
I don't know when you say demand, what are you referring to? Like I said, I think the views are clear. As with any policy, there could be multiple views, multiple opinions. And we, unlike our primary rival, we are a liberal party that encourages different views and opinions. So while this was debated, I will tell you that this was debated in the committee. And then it was felt that now that the government has set up its own committee, it's best to wait.
Right. So let's move on to something that is there in the manifesto, the Mahalakshmi Scheme, which looks like a reinvention of the Nyay scheme, the minimum income support scheme. Why has the amount been increased from 72,000 in 2019 to 1 lakh? What is the calculation behind it? How have you arrived at that 1 lakh amount?
You're right in your observation that this is a quote unquote rehash of the 2019 Nyay promise. While this was perhaps the primary platform or the promise in 2019 in the manifesto, we've got some other bolder ideas, I would say, this time. As the 72,000 to 1 lakh is nothing but inflation indexing.
Okay, there's no additional calculation there.
No.
Right. No. So basically, do you also then stick to the kind of policy that you had in 2019, where even there was no real mention of, like PM Kisan, which is targeted to farmers. This was more towards all poor families. So again, are you doubling down on that you want to help not in any sort of targeted way, but in a scatter shot towards all the poor in the country?
Okay, there are two things. First, since I was involved in the 2019 manifesto and was involved in the drafting of Nyay, it is wrong to say that that was a scattershot. At that time, it was actually criticized even for not being universal and being too targeted, because it had a specific formula that it would cater to the bottom 20% of all poor households.
Right.
And there was an elaborate design of the scheme that we had. This time, we have left it generic and open, and where we have said that this would be for all poor families. How the poor will be identified, what will be the threshold, will it be targeted, will it be the same amount for everybody? I think those are matters of policy details, and we were writing a manifesto, not a government order or even a budget document.
Okay.
Right. So my next question is, another interesting thing that you've put in the manifesto, it's about presiding officers of both houses in the parliament. You will ensure that they sever ties with the political parties. How will you ensure that?
See, I think a lot of this has to be done through legislation.
Okay.
It has to be done through legislation where, I mean, we believe we are still a functioning democratic sovereign republic where we do things through laws and legislations. Um, I mean, if your question is what will be the details of that legislation, I think it's again very premature. I think the important point is to get across the idea that this would be a bill that we would consider passing.
Sharad,
Okay, and yeah, so now switching tact a little bit, coming to the government finances. On the one hand, you say that you want to cap the amount of cesses that the central government can collect at 5% of its total revenue. Currently, it's about 27 or 28%. And I mean, this is a very contentious issue. A lot of state governments have said that, the government is keeping a lot more revenue in its cesses. So one, there is that where you will be curtailing quite a lot of the income that the center can earn. And on the other side, you're promising things like 1 lakh to poor families. You're waiving off education loans. So how do you balance the fisc?
Yeah. So first, I think it's you raise an important point about the cess, and it is a new idea. It is a new idea to put a limit to 5%, and the reason for that is, I mean, I think we have to first acknowledge that our spirit of federalism is broken. It's completely destroyed. There is complete mutual distrust between the union government and the states, and the primary reason for that is what I call fiscal federalism. And the primary reason behind the tension over fiscal federalism is the sharing of tax revenues. And as per my figures, the Finance Commission's own calculations as of 2020-21 said it was 22%. Cess and surcharges were 22%. I mean, we now are at a stage where there's even a surcharge on direct taxes, which is, and this whole scheme is just plain duplicitous by the finance minister, and I have to call that out. In our discussions with all state governments, it was very, very clear that this was a raging issue. This just led to a lot of acrimony, and we said the best way to do this is to do it through a legislation. Just like we had FRBM and we had other things, we had to put a ceiling and on the amount of cesses and surcharges that can be collected. 5% was a number that came up after consultations with various state finance ministers serving and passing. As about coming to kind of balancing the budget, again, I want to be very clear. We were not writing a budget document. We were writing a manifesto document. While you focused on the expenditure side, you've not perhaps focused enough on the revenue side. And I think it is very, very clear for all the promises that this government has made, the overall tax to GDP, which is state and center, has stayed flat. So it's stayed flat at about 10-11%, I think. So there is very clearly the tax buoyancy that was promised and expected after GST and other sorts of reforms have not fructified. The other important thing is private investment as a share of GDP is down. So right. Private investment, there is no economic activity because of which your revenue collection is muted. You're dependent largely on personal income taxes that have increased due to admittedly better management and better collection. So I don't think we can talk about the deficit just by looking at the expenditure side without considering the revenue side. We believe there will be a significant revenue boost, tax revenue boost, both due to buoyancy and due to growth.
Okay, Amogh?
Yeah. So one of the points that you mentioned in the manifesto, I'll just read that out. We will encourage reform of personal laws. Such reform must be undertaken with participation and consent of the communities concerned. Is this the Congress's counter of UCC that BJP often brings up, and what kind of personal laws are we talking about here?
Yes, certainly UCC is one part of it. I mean, I think, though I prefer to think of it as a common civil code and not a uniform civil code. I think the word uniform is a very dangerous word in the Indian context. Um, but I think the underlying principle is about consulting with the concerned stakeholders before making changes. I think that's the underlying principle. Now, if we're changing personal laws for certain specific groups, religious groups or caste groups or even geographical groups, we have to ask them. We can't do what the current government did, which is go and unilaterally change things in Jammu and Kashmir or Ladakh without asking the people. So I think that is what we mean. You can interpret it as, a common civil code or otherwise, but I think the idea is to have consultations before making any changes.
Would you like to mention some personal laws that you are looking to reform?
No, I think there could be many personal laws across, religions and castes. Of course, the more talked about one are the Muslim personal laws, but I think
Right.
that this would cut across all groups.
Okay, across groups. So one more interesting point is that Congress wants to bring police investigation and intelligence agencies under the oversight of parliament and state legislatures. What's the idea behind this?
I mean, the idea behind that is clear, absolute, indiscriminate weaponization
Okay,
of institutions in this country.
right,
Um, Now, we can indulge in whataboutery and say, did it not happen before, which normally most BJP inclined people like to raise. But that apart, I don't care what happened in the past. I only care about what's going to happen in the future.
right.
And it's very clear that weaponization of institutions had to stop. There's one mechanism that we can think about, which is putting them under the parliament scrutiny or parliament oversight. There could be other ways. There could be constitutional body. There could be other ways. But this was one idea that we thought was important, and we put it in the manifesto.
Right. And you've also promised statehood for Jammu and Kashmir, for Pondicherry, but for Delhi, you're short of statehood. That is something that your ally in the India Alliance meeting, Aam Aadmi Party, had announced as a guarantee of India parties that they'll give a statehood to Delhi as well. Why haven't you promised that?
Yes, I think because that is an issue that is being discussed, that is an issue that concerns one of our important allies, alliance partners. I think it was best to not have it in the Congress Party manifesto. And please also remember, this is an all India manifesto.
Right.
I know that the other various state units of the Congress Party are also adding to this for state specific promises and issues. So the Delhi Pradesh Congress Committee is free to do whatever they want about Delhi statehood and on top of what we have said here.
It may as well come in some other form in some other manifesto.
Correct.
Sharad, do you have more questions?
Yeah, so there seems to be a slight break between the politics professed by some of the members of the Congress party and what's written in the manifesto, especially to do with the private sector and job creation. So last week, when the chief economic advisor said that the burden of job creation should not solely be on the government and the private sector should step up, he was attacked quite severely by people like Mr. Kharge and Mr. Chidambaram, who expressed shock and disbelief at such a statement being made. But then in the manifesto, you clearly say that the private sector is the best creator of jobs. So, I mean, is this a dissonance in policy making or in policy thought?
I didn't follow that whole debate or controversy closely, but I mean, I know what you're referring to. I think the criticism of the chief economic advisor's comment was more about absolving themselves of the responsibility. Um, the government cannot create jobs does not necessarily have to mean or imply that the government has to actually create jobs. It is ultimately responsible for fostering an environment and an investment climate that will create jobs and produce jobs. And you're right, we categorically believe, and this is not the first time that we have said that the private sector will be the most primary job creator in our country. I recall I was part of the 2018 economic resolution of the Congress Party where we said it, 2019 manifesto we said it, 2022 Raipur resolution we said it, and we are saying it again. So we are very, very clear that the actual jobs to be created will be by the private sector, which is why, may I point you to another related policy that we have announced, which is a PLI to an ELI, what I call a PLI to an ELI. And that's important. I know it can be technical for those that are not trained in economics, but it is to say that we will incentivize corporates and the private sector largely to create jobs because the capital labor balance has been skewed inordinately towards capital. So just output does not mean jobs. The prime example being semiconductors. You can have as much output without hiring a single person. So we are very clear that private sector has to create jobs. We also understand they need to be incentivized, but we don't agree with the current set of incentive structures, which is output focused or just mere lazy tax cuts, which have clearly not yielded results. So we have said it will be an employee linked incentive. To the best of my knowledge, this is the first time that any such idea is being proposed in India.
And this will maintain the competitiveness of these industries because that's the big factor, right? They're moving towards more capital because it's more cost effective.
Yes, of course. I mean, competitiveness is as a policymaker, that's for each firm and each industry to make their decisions. But we will create incentives for people that create jobs. So does that mean that conglomerates can move into more labor-intensive sectors? Maybe, yes. Which is why I think, since you're talking about jobs, I can also point out, which I think is almost a very bold idea for jobs from the Congress Party, given its history, which is where we have categorically said we will double the share of mining to 5% of GDP for mining critical minerals in an ecologically sensitive and labor-safe manner.
And create 1.5 crore jobs in the process.
Correct. And that was based on some deep, since I was involved in it, I will tell you, it was based on extensive consultations with industry, with firms, with geologists, and also some analysis of the labor elasticity of mining and what kind of jobs that it can provide. The most important about mining is it takes jobs to people, not people to jobs, because mining happens locally. And it usually happens in backward and rural areas, tribal areas, which also means jobs for the oppressed classes.
Right. And now I know that you caution us against asking for specifics, but one issue that you've raised is something that even developed countries are grappling with, and India has been grappling with for a while, which is that you say that you'll address wealth and income inequalities through suitable changes in policy. But given that this is something that so many people have been grappling with, so many countries have been grappling with, a few specifics might be in order. How would you go about doing this?
See, I think it is a complex topic. You're right. The world over, this is an issue. I alluded to it when I talked about ELI, which is, I think the fundamental problem is the capital labor balance. There used to be a time when there was a greater balance. Now it has inordinately shifted to one side, and that is what is leading to to distortions in the labor market and income inequality. Now it may not be in the manifesto, but I've personally written about these issues in the past, where I've even said, whose GDP is it anyway? When we start talking about GDP and GDP growth, and so I think it's you're right. It's very complex, but I do that policies that are more labor market focused without creating too many distortions, but creating incentives for labor market activity is important. And that's the broad range of policies that we refer to.
Okay, and now my final question, at least on the economic side, is that you've spoken about in the manifesto about helping the private sector across sizes, whether it's the small, medium, or large. But there is one step that you mentioned that seems to create a non-level playing field, where you say that you want to give tax relief to shopkeepers and retailers who are facing stiff competition from online on e-commerce. So, I mean, does this not create a non-level playing field?
Well, again, it's a deeper issue. It's not restricted to India. If you follow the work of the chairperson of the Federal Trade Commission, Lena Khan in America, this is exactly the issue that they are grappling with. Here's a simple fact. The simple fact is an online e-tailer is funded entirely by American capital, is able to undercut physical retailers, and indulges in price gorging, and has put millions of lives or livelihoods at stake. So this is not a mere level playing field economic issue. This is actually, in some sense, a market dominance, market monopoly, unfair advantages issue. And that is why this was mentioned. And it's not unique. We're not the first to say this. This is an issue everywhere. I mean, I don't want to get into the details of this, but this whole thing goes back to the debate of is 5 rupees cheaper good for a consumer the goal to strive for always, when it means displacing millions of livelihoods of other businesses. And this is a very complex issue, but we heard lakhs of physical shopkeepers and distributors, and we felt that their demand was genuine.
Since you were a part of a manifesto committee for 2019 elections also, and this time as well, there are a couple of significant things which were there that time and aren't this time. One of them is the sedition law. Technically, sedition law is not there anymore, but section 150 of among the 3 criminal laws is, according to many, an extension of sedition law, but the manifesto is silent on that.
No, so see, I think there's a small section called reversing the damage, where we have categorically said that we will repeal, amend, or reenact various laws. I know in our internal drafts, we actually had a list of all the laws.
Okay.
But then we also realized that it may not be exhaustive, and hence we refrained from putting out some of those laws. So you could also then argue, why is CAA missing, when the party's stand is very clearly that we will repeal CAA, right? So it is there. It's not in the list, as you rightly mentioned. But I must also point out that I think we say somewhere in the manifesto, if I recall right, that this is over and above what, it should be construed as over and above what we may have said in 2019.
Okay. So another difference is that in 2019, you said AFSPA in Jammu and Kashmir would be reviewed. Again, that is also something that is not there.
Yeah, again, I know you're very focused on what's not in the manifesto, but
there's no comparison between.
That's fine. See, things have changed with Jammu and Kashmir. Okay, when we read that manifesto, we didn't back then know. We were 4 months away from unilateral changes in Jammu and Kashmir. So things have changed dramatically.
Okay, so there's no promise of reviewing AFSPA this time from the Congress party.
We have not listed out all the laws. I mean, I can tell you that we do have a list of laws under the reversing the damage section. We've
Right.
said we either repeal or reenact or amend. We haven't published that list.
And the manifesto is also silent about Article 370. Do we assume that the issue is settled? There's no difference from the opinion of the central government or in general?
I will have to check what we said about Article 370 because again, it's one of those laws it didn't. I think we have said, if you, I will tell you, we have said that we may. Yes, we will review. We will review and amend. It comes in the review and amend section.
Article 370 as well. Okay. So my last question is, we've seen the demand of caste census, and it's for sure there in the manifesto, but the electoral benefits have been questionable. Last year, there were elections to 5 states in the Hindi heartland. Caste census was made a big poll plan by the Congress party, but it did not result in much electoral gains. Do you think this time in 2024, the case can be different in terms of caste census? And that's why you've gone in with it once again.
See, I think what happens between an electoral outcome and before is I think we have to be careful before we start trying to draw straight lines between a particular promise and an electoral outcome. An electoral outcome is a complex interplay of many factors. I will only point you to two things. One is it is our belief, and it is also the ugly truth that caste, social inequalities, caste-based, identity-based inequalities are still prevalent, are still wide, are still growing. And it is important to address that. The second, and so for that, we say, instead of taking a knee-jerk approach and coming up with solutions, let us start by fundamentally understanding the extent of the problem, the gravity of the problem, which is what a caste census will do. It will provide an X-ray of the problem. Now, does it appeal with the electorate, I think is your question. I will point you to a survey by some reputed, I don't think much of more surveys in this country, but there's one by CSDS, which has talked about this issue of caste census. And I think you find that, if my memory serves me right, about more than 3/4 of people from the oppressed caste support the idea of a caste census or the need for a caste census.
Right.
So there you go. There you have the answer in terms of what the electorate thinks about it. I'm surprised. Maybe you all think it's already being done, which is the apprenticeship, the right to apprenticeship. From all my other interactions, that seems to be the big one that everyone's asking me about, including in international circles. But yeah, I think since we talked a lot about jobs, I will say that, this time we said that the issue of jobs is the biggest issue in the countries, period. Right. And so far, all of our ideas and intellectual horsepower has been spent in the placebo of welfare for unemployment, which is through unemployment allowance or other sorts of things. I think we put in a lot of our effort this time to see how we can come up with some very specific, concrete, bold ideas for jobs, even if it means going back on some of the things we had said earlier, which was around mining that we talked about. It is in that context, I think the right to apprenticeship, which is a legal right that we're talking about, is, in my view, perhaps the biggest game changer of an idea in terms of job creation. Of course, there are macroeconomic factors for job creation, but just matching labor markets with labor demand, I think this is one of the biggest ideas that we have in the manifesto.
Sure. And but on that note, thank you so much for joining us. It actually gave us a lot of insight about how the Congress party is thinking about various issues, because A lot of the points in the manifesto are naturally just single line mentions. And as you said, the details will come later. But thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.